So here we come to the Greek theater and the polis. Polis is Greek for city. So the Greek theater and the polis. We come to the kinds of plays that were put on in the Greek theater. We know from the evidence that we have that drama and comedy were both very popular in ancient Athens and in other places, but most of our evidence comes from Athens. There's also something called satyr plays, and the satyr plays were meant to be comic relief. The dramas could sometimes get pretty heavy. If you're reading your Antigone, you know this is the case. And so at times, at these theater festivals that involved the entire community, the going after, sitting through several great tragedies, might be time for a little comic relief. So the satyr plays, very short, comical, rude body, B-A-W-D-Y, reminds me a lot of Seth MacFarlane and his approach to comedy. So even back in the day, the Greeks enjoyed really raucous, rowdy comedy, just as we do on occasion. We have several playwrights. Some of the videos you were looking at will mention Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes. The first three, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, very famous for their tragedies, for their dramas. The numbers that I suggest out here, this is what we think was the body of work that they had. Aeschylus, some 80 plays, Sophocles, 120, etc. We don't have nearly that many that survive. If you'll recall from our discussion of primary sources, when we have them, it's fantastic, but sometimes we don't have as many as we would like. Aristophanes wrote comedy, and again, we think he wrote about 40 different plays, give or take. The theater festival at Athens was a celebration of the god Dionysus, just as we noted that the Olympic competitions, the physical athletic competitions were in celebration of Zeus. Theatrical celebrations typically were in celebration of Dionysus. You have here a work of art. This is a piece of pottery. It's the bottom of a drinking bowl, a large crater that would be used for wine and putting wine for serving. And here at the bottom you have a boat. You have Dionysus sitting here at the helm. And you can tell he's in the water because we have dolphins. Dolphins also associated with Dionysus, very playful marine animals. And this is an unusual boat because growing along the mast is intertwined a vine, and the vine is a grapevine. Dionysus often associated with wine and grape. He's in a boat because the Greeks believed that Dionysus was a transplant, an immigrant. He came from Asia, coming from the east. So he came across the Mediterranean to Greece. This is another image of Dionysus. This is a Roman version of him. It's a mosaic from Tunisia. And you see here Dionysus drawing this chariot, leading this chariot, excuse me. And you know it's Dionysus for a couple of reasons. First off, he has this garland of grape leaves on his head, celebrating his connection to wine. He also carries this staff, which is indicative somehow of leadership. We often see a staff for Dionysus with greenery on it. He is a god of the springtime, so you see the spring aspects to him as well. Here he's being led, his chariot's being drawn by leopards. A very unusual source for transportation, to be sure, but leopards also associated with Dionysus, indicating his connection to Asia and then perhaps Africa as well. Here you have a woman who is coming along. She is dancing. She is playing the tambourine, if you will, something like a tambourine. And this is another attribute of Dionysus. He was very much favored by women. A lot of the ritual associated with Dionysus has to do with women. So here he is in procession, his chariot being drawn by leopards, accompanied by a woman who is dancing, offering music. Here, a 2nd century AD Roman copy of a Hellenistic statue. This is a late Greek statue. And again, this is marble, a different version of Dionysus. His staff, his typical denotation of leadership is missing here. That's okay, sometimes these things don't survive. But here is his headpiece, grape leaves for his headdress, and then over here, this particular tree trunk that he's propped up against features wine, grape leaves, etc. One of the videos you're looking at Blackboard also notes how the Greeks really enjoyed representing theater and drama in pottery. Here we have a vase that features images from the play, the tragedy Agamemnon. Agamemnon, you may know, is a hero from the Trojan War. And after that war was over, he came home to deal with family and some issues that had happened while he was gone, some issues that had happened both abroad and at home. And this works into another aspect, another mythological storytelling of homecoming. So you have that here, both on these images here. And then over here you have a much more body image of one of the satyr plays. This poor fellow is holding someone's head, or hopefully it's a mask, an acting mask. But at any rate, we have even the body plays were recreated in pottery. So in Athens there are theater festivals, more than one each year, but the one we're mostly focusing on is the Great Dionysia. Each year, an elected official called an archon was in charge of the theatrical festivals in Athens. In Athens in particular, we elect 10 different archons. Archon is just a Greek word that means leader. The eponymous archon gets to have the calendar named for him. So the eponymous archon gives his name to that particular year. The Great Dionysia, which is the festival we're looking at, coincides with the beginning of spring. Again, reminding us that Dionysus is a god associated with the spring. Here we have a couple of images of the Theater of Dionysus. This is the south side of the Acropolis, looking down towards the coast from here. If you could stand up even higher, you could see the water from here. You can see the orchestra down here, the place where the performers would indeed come together and perform. So we would call it perhaps the stage. The seats coming up, these seats probably a little bit later addition to the theater than 5th century, probably in the 4th century. And when the seats run out, people would just sit up on the hill. And another image of that theater. Probably could hold somewhere around 10,000 people, give or take, once you got that hill fully occupied. So what are the connections to Dionysus with the theater? We're thinking that maybe the music, the dancing, that image of the woman with the tambourine, right? That somehow that is one of our main connections to Dionysus. Theatrical performances seem to connect, in antiquity, seem to connect music, dancing, and acting in a single performance. So how did these plays come to production? In the late summer or early fall, writers would apply for a chorus. They would submit their writings and their application to the eponymous archon. Tragedians, those who wrote tragedies, proposed a 3-play cycle for consideration. So this is a lot of work. We don't know really how the choices were made. We just know that it is that archon's job to decide which plays will be put on in the coming year. So an elected official will determine what plays we will put on. A very interesting connection between politics and entertainment. When it comes to the cost, some of the cost was borne by the state, some of it borne by individuals. The state will pay the actors. When you apply for a chorus, you're applying for the state to give you experienced people on state pay. We'll see in a moment that for a tragedy, that could be anywhere between 12 to 15 people. For a comedy, another 24 people. So again, this could be a particularly important expense that the city would bear to support actors for the theater. The state will also pay the cost of the average citizen, often called a theat, the theats to attend. So there would be, again, you would get a ticket from the state because probably the Athenian population could support a good 30 to 40,000 people who were eligible to attend the theater. Again, I think we can pretty safely assume that only about 10,000 people could fit in this theater. So this would be a hot ticket indeed, and the state is going to cover the cost of those folks attending. From the private sources, we have this concept of a choregos. Choregos, that's the Greek word from which we get the word choreography. A choregos is a private citizen who footed most of the cost of putting the play on. The props, the other actors, things of that nature. We might consider this person a producer in the modern sense. If your play is chosen and you line up your choregos, etc., you have about 6 months for production, for rehearsal, to get it all together. We've talked a little bit about theater space already and what you might confront as a playwright, an actor, when you come to that space. So again, the Theater of Dionysus in Athens on the south side of the Acropolis. The orchestra is that circular dancing space, that circular performance space. And the slope of the Acropolis provides a natural watching space, or a theatron, a theater. Once you get to that orchestra, to that space, you might have a skene, the original word for tent in Greek. But a skene is essentially the scenery, a backdrop. You may have something you can work with there that might represent a temple, a rooftop, even a cave. Most likely made out of wood. It could be painted to reflect the landscape of the action that you want to do. So again, you have some kind of scenery to deal with, we think. Ekuklema is another thing that we see associated with skene. It's probably like a platform or something that can give the performance space some depth, some altitude if you need to raise some of your performers up. So we do see that also was used, so perhaps like a platform. Mekane, the machine to lift people, to lift props, so that there could be, again, another, some action, if you will, in the play that required that you actually lift people up higher off the stage or lift props of some sort to explain the action that's going on. This is a fun image. This is a mosaic, as you probably can tell, and it's a mosaic from the Roman Emperor Hadrian's villa, depicting the kinds of masks that performers would wear in the Greek theater. To the left, you have a tragic mask, probably a woman, it seems. To the right, you have a comic mask. And as you can see, this fellow, bearded, wearing the headpiece that Dionysus might wear with the grape leaves and the grapevine and the grapes. So he is much more of a comic persona. The mask is an icon of Dionysus. It's a representation. You may have seen the images of theater masks. The comic mask could feature the likeness of a known person. There were always stock types: old man, the wise prophet, perhaps, a girl, a running slave, perhaps even a stock mask to represent a king. The mask could be changed for effect. Say your lead character needs to demonstrate mourning or sadness, so the mask would change. When Oedipus, in the play Oedipus Rex, when Oedipus actually harms himself, blinds himself, there was a mask to reflect how his eyes would have changed. Other things associated with the theater that, again, many of you would, if you're in theater now, you would absolutely find very common. Costumes help to show gender, status. Kings, for example, would have very elaborate robes, while those who had suffered some misfortune may show up in tattered robes. The chorus, we've talked a little bit about, we'll talk more. The chorus could be dressed as birds, sometimes as frogs, wasps, townspeople, women, old men. In the play Antigone, the chorus would have been dressed as old men, old members of society. They're supposed to be wise. They're supposed to have seen a lot of things. They're supposed to understand that sometimes our emotions get in our way. And of course, props, which we already mentioned a little bit, but we do know, for example, if you read your plays, some of your characters must carry props in order to be identified. If Apollo shows up in your play, most likely he'll carry a bow. If Heracles shows up in your play, he's going to have to carry this club that he's very famous for, so that the people know through the props who this character is supposed to be. It's very helpful in that regard. We mentioned here that in the play Medea, we understand from the play itself that there's a chest, a sort of a clothing chest that's put on stage to hold the special, I say special gowns that Medea has prepared for Jason's bride-to-be. Medea is going to kill the bride-to-be in very special ways through these special gowns. So the chorus. The chorus is a group of people expected to sing and dance on the stage. As we said earlier, in tragedy, you could have 12 to 15 members in the chorus. So for our play Antigone, you should assume that there are many people speaking these lines. Sometimes one person would speak a line, sometimes the whole group would speak these lines. In comedy, some 24 members of the chorus could be expected. The chorus is a community institution that we think predates the theater as a medium of performance. Before theater existed, a chorus would perform at important city-state events. For example, memorials, perhaps remembering the war dead. Marriages, perhaps someone throws a great wedding party and you'll have a chorus singing at the marriage. Olympic victory parties. If your city has sent someone to the Olympics to compete and they've actually won, you may bring them back to a grand party including a chorus. They might recite poems, again, sing songs, lead the community in celebration. So we think the chorus is probably the antecedent of the theater itself, that the chorus is the inspiration for theatrical events. We think that what happened was that each of these choruses might have a leader, and then in the beginning they all worked together, sang together, performed together, but one chorus leader took it upon himself to step forward and tell the story individually, enhance the performance by doing a soliloquy or a solo. Tradition maintains that this fellow's name was Thespis, the first one to do so. His family name gives us the word thespian, the word for actor. So, the chorus and its role in the play. In tragedy, as you are seeing in Antigone, because I know you're reading it, they sing, they speak, they serve as continuity for the play to move the action along. They often speak as the conscience of the city-state. Right? They warn when the lead characters are going off course. They sing for justice. So if you're looking for your connection to the city-state in your play, and I hope you are, you're going to find it oftentimes in the chorus itself. And the chorus will say, what is correct? What is right? What is justice? What does the community want? You often find that in the chorus. In comedy, comedic choruses may have begun with the komos, which is this procession of Dionysus that's very unearthly, very unruly. And so oftentimes our chorus in comedy will be very raucous, very loud, sometimes very silly. Again, in some plays, very famous plays of Aristophanes, the chorus can be clouds, the chorus can be frogs, and the audience would have found this to be a lot of fun. Also, as you're reading a play, look for the parabasis. A parabasis is a crucial moment in the play. At this point, the chorus will step out of their normal space. Perhaps they've always been hanging around in the background. Perhaps they have been hanging around on a platform. They will step out of their normal space. They will drop their props. They will drop all assumption of who they are and address the audience pointedly. So look for that in your play to see where something so dramatic has happened that the chorus needs to talk to the audience and say, look, this is a bad thing, or watch out for this, or here comes a big change, right? So again, actively engaging the audience in the actual production, bringing the audience in. Sometimes that's the chorus's job. So again, they sing, they dance. We don't know much about the music that would have been performed at these theatricals. We don't have that. That does not survive. All we have are the lyrics, what the chorus would have said. We don't know about the dancing. We don't have any directions in the play about how the choreography or the chorus should be. We have images on vases, but that's not really satisfactory to understand the steps, if you will. When you read Antigone, when you read the chorus's lines, you'll see things that say strophe and antistrophe. Strophe means turn, antistrophe means turn back. That could have something to do with movement on stage. That could have something to do with which direction they face. It could also have just something to do with, here is the first part of what we're going to tell you, here is the next part. So ultimately, this chorus is used to express apprehension, that they maybe want the audience to fear about what's going on in the action on stage. The chorus can express violence. They can react to something, and combativeness. Sometimes within the chorus, they don't necessarily agree with each other, and they'll come back and forth. Finally, I suppose we could talk a little bit about actors and their delivery. In tragedy, there were originally 2 actors on the stage, and eventually that's going to evolve to 3. So we think originally this kind of theatrical performance begins with a chorus, and one person steps forward, and then that evolves into 2 people, because it's nice to have someone to act with, to react to on stage, and eventually this turns into 3. So typically we don't have more than 3 actors on a stage at any one time. That means one actor might have to play multiple roles. In comedy, the same, 3 or more actors, this time three actors, perhaps more. Comedy can be very physical, and we think that the audience really needed to be aware of current issues because the comedians would lampoon current things going on. So not unlike what we do today for comedy, to be sure. The masks could create some issues that would be very different from our own theatrical experiences. Actors could not use facial expression if they're wearing these masks to indicate who their character is. Thus, their voice has to be really exaggerated. Their gestures, their physical gestures would have to be very exaggerated. And this is something that's hard for us to sort of get our mindset into how this would have happened. But one thing that is interesting, one scholar has suggested that the connections made between the skills required for acting and those required of political speech makers, and those speech makers who made arguments in the law courts, which were also large venues, some 500 people could sit on a jury, so that the same kind of skills were necessary for succeeding politically in Athens as they were for succeeding on the stage. So, connections between the professions of acting and being a professional politician or a lawyer, very clear in Athens, perhaps even clear in our own day. Yeah. You might see long speeches in your plays. You might see your actors pleading, deceiving. The speeches often are written to invite the audience in. The actor's character may be trying to justify what he's been doing by really pushing forth a sincerity in the delivery of his speech, maybe trying to flatter the audience. Creon tries to flatter the townspeople in Antigone. And for him, the townspeople certainly are the chorus, but also the audience. So, what are some of the connections to our class after we take a look at all of this, right? So we've taken a look at the religious connections to the theater. We've taken a look at the physical space dedicated to the theater. We've taken a look at how the economic support that the city provides for the theater. And even to the point of suggesting that there might be some political connections, either in the skills required to deliver a good performance in the theater, or that citizens get free tickets, or that if you're going to follow a comedy, you need to be aware of what's going on politically in the city if you're going to follow the jokes. Right? So what are some of the connections to our class? Theater in Athens was a city-sponsored celebration and entertainment. Citizens of the city attended. The state paid for citizens to attend. Current political issues could be addressed in either a serious or comical fashion. Theatergoers went to be entertained. Theatergoers went to experience stories of the heroic, to suspend reality, to make connections between their present and their past. Theater is a creative process, from writing to production, from acting a part to drawing in the audience. Theatergoers learn and discuss. Theater requires a community in order for meaning to be created. No 2 performances are exactly alike, given that no 2 audiences are exactly alike. I think this is important to consider, that theater requires a community in order for meaning to be created. Actors can get on the stage, they can tell a story, but if there's no one there to listen or to respond to it, If the audience isn't engaged, is the performance successful? So think of these things as you're working through Antigone. Think of these things as you continue to think about your major projects for this course.